What is up, y'all? Today I'm doing something a little bit different because I'm going to be ranking all the schools when it comes to console PvP. More specifically, Grandmaster console PvP, which sounds like a really niche topic, but if you're going to be doing console PvP, chances are it's Grandmaster. So, we have the 7 schools here, along with some dual school combinations, which I thought were worth noting, because, well, I only put in the ones that would place differently on the tier list. The top left are the primary school, and the bottom right will be the secondary school that they're weaving into. Now, I will preface this whole tier list by saying, don't take this as what school should you play Grandmaster console PvP. You know, it doesn't matter if it's an S tier school or a D tier school, which, spoiler alert, there are no D tier schools or F tier schools, that's not even a tier on the list, because all schools in Grandmaster console are viable. Just play whatever you like. Don't if you can't enjoy it without winning every single match, you probably shouldn't be doing PvP. Just do whatever you like, okay? This video is just going to describe what the best schools are in the meta. So I'm going to start from the top. The absolute best school in Grandmaster console PvP is hands down Lith. Okay? Instant S tier. In fact, this school is so good. What the hell did I just do? Okay. This school is so good that I'm just going to add another row above it just for Lith. Okay, it's just that good. It is in a tier of its own because this school is just that unstoppable, okay? And it's mostly because of just one spell, and that's Centaurion. This spell just goes through several shields and it turns them into pretty solid blades, which it's one of, I believe, only 2 spells that get rid of shields and then hit that are actually like good, along with Elephant at Grandmaster at least, which is obviously very good because that means you can stack a ton of buffs and they won't be able to defend themselves really. So you really can't effectively shield against a Lith. You also can't weakness them effectively because they have Stone Colossus. The only form of mitigation that a Lith will probably not counter is healing, but healing doesn't really matter if they one-shot you. I think Lith beats just about any school, maybe except for Storm, because a Storm might be able to kill them first. And that's really your only shot against a Lith, is you gotta just kill them as fast as possible. But on any school that's not Storm, in order to do that, you're gonna need to buff stack, because they have, like, their life. They have 3,500 health, something like that. So you're gonna need to buff stack, but most people don't build their decks around buff stacking unless they're Lith. So, yeah. Yeah, Lith, genuinely, if you have a functioning brain, it is very difficult to lose on a Lith, okay? Now I'm probably gonna go with its regular counterpart, Life. This is probably the best non-dual school. Life just has a lot of spells that really, really go well together, and that, frankly, just have more value than they should. Okay, I'm talking Hunting Worm, I'm talking Nature's Wrath. Well, okay, Nature's Wrath is kind of fair, but you can use it in conjunction with Hunting Worm, with Luminous Weaver, with Seraph, with Pigsy. All of those spells just combo together so well. And also remember, you can use this on a Lith as well. And it just is very, very difficult to outvalue a Life because they can just hit you and heal at the same time. They don't really have any bad matchups against except for Storm. Death, you would think, would be a bad matchup, but the only thing Death can counter heals and turn them into are weaknesses and shields. And frankly, that's not very useful for killing the Life. Why would I want to trade their heal for defense? That's just not really going to help me kill them. And also, it's weaknesses and shields. Most Lives are packing either Snowman or Glacial Fortress, okay? They're going to have weakness counters. And shields are not an issue at all for Life because of Hunting Worm. Hunting Worm just completely counters Skeletal Pirate, which is silly. I think Life is just quite an easy school to play, even if you don't use stuff like Pigsy. Like, even if you just use, like, Worm to heal, it's still so easy. Like, Worm is always a good move. You can just throw it out pretty much at any time. And not to mention that Lives have so much health, so It's just a really, really good school. They have one of the best libraries. They have really good stats. All of their matchups are good, pretty much, except for maybe Storm. Yeah. Oh, and I also forgot to mention just how good healing is at Grand. You know, I mean, Fire and Storm also have healing, but it's not nearly as good as Life's healing. I guess Storm does have Berry, but that's one of the things that makes Storm good when I get to that. So, yeah. The next school I'm going to bring up is Balance. I think they're right below Life as one of the better schools, one of the best schools. They have a lot going for them. Mainly just that they have the strongest hit in the game at Grandmaster, which is Judgment for 14 pips, doing 1400 base damage. Whereas the next strongest spell, I think, is like Triton or something. And that's what, about 900? And that's a Storm. And this is a Balance. So them having Judgment is really insane, which means that all you really have to do is stall until you can get max pips, and then threaten a Judgment every single turn while spamming Scarab and Scorpion to take weaknesses and shields off and put them on you, so losing them rounds of tempo. It just applies a ton of pressure. It is really difficult to win against the Balance if you get in that situation. So I think it's just a pretty straightforward school to win on. It's not good against every school, but it's good against a lot of schools. And honestly, I just don't think it's a very difficult school to play. Not to mention that they have Gearhead, so they can very, very effectively counter singular dots, which makes them really good against Death and Ice because they rely on their singular dots to remove shields. Under that, I'm going to put Fire. It's kind of hard to formulate my opinion on Fire because I haven't fought that many of them. Some of them really suck and some of them are really good. I think Fire has a weird place in the meta because it kind of is very matchup dependent. If you're facing like a Shield Gambit school, Fire can be really good because they're just not going to be able to set up any of that shit. At the same time though, because Fire is just so reliant on countering shields, if you just don't shield, a Fire won't be able to do much. If you just focus on weaknessing them and hope that they can't catch up with snowmen or like fizzle a snowman, the Fire won't really be able to do much. That said though, I mean, being able to counter shields is very good at Grand. Being able to just have so much damage output is really good. And trap countering is not that useful, but it can be. And also just Immolate, that makes me think of Immolate and how much damage that does as a finisher. That's really good. Brimstone does a ton of damage and gives you a really good buff. I don't really have a lot to say about Fire, but it's just a really, really solid school. Ice is similar in that I don't have a lot to say about them because I haven't fought them that much, but I don't think they're that great of a school at Grand. Their library just doesn't work that great at this level. They don't really have like much particularly that goes in their favor other than their really good blade counters. That makes them very good against certain schools, but against other schools, there's just not much they can do. Their damage just really sucks. They don't have many like good comboing tools. Their dot is 5 pips instead of like what Death has with 4 pip poison. I think Ice on its own with no dual schooling kinda sucks, just a little bit. However, Ice Fire, for example. Actually, no, I'll talk about Ice Life first, and well, this isn't really like using a fusion or anything. I'm just talking about having a life mastery and healing. It can be really, really hard to kill an Ice with a life mastery. Like really hard, and that just makes them really good, is that they survive a lot. And that also gives them trap counters and dot counters, so that's very good for them. Ice Fire is very interesting though. I think I'll even put this above Ice Life. It gets around their weakness to shields. And just with that snowman fusion, that does absolute mass. If you're against Ice Fire and they use that spell and you don't have double dot clears, you're kind of fucked. You just kind of lose. Okay, you just kind of lose. So Ice Fire is like significantly higher in the meta than regular Ice, and so is Ice with the Life Mastery. But I think Ice Fire is a step up from that as well. Now Storm is kind of hard to tell. Despite how scary this school is to fight, I don't find myself losing against them that much. They apply a ton of pressure just because whenever they have 5 or more pips, they can, you have to have a shield or a weakness up, or else they're going to take half your health instantly. And that's really scary. But if you can manage to keep a debuff up every round, pretty much, and, get the tempo going, and even force them to go on the defense, you win. That said, Storm in the right hands, a good Storm player can go very, very far. Especially if you have stuff like Storm Beetle and Storm Elf. It is very difficult to stop a Storm from killing you. It applies a ton of pressure, but they are easy to kill. A higher DPP school can probably kill them in 2 hits. So Storm is very weird, but I think right around the middle of A tier is where they belong. Myth is another very straightforward school. I can't really say that they're bad at all, but I also can't say that they're that great. They do really well with knocking down defenses, but not quite as good as Lith. Myth just kind of feels like a worse, neutered version of Lith because they don't have any spells that remove shields before hitting. There is Minotaur, but Minotaur will consume any singular traps on the first hit, so you can't really efficiently trap stack and then Minotaur unless you're using stuff like Mythic Fuel. And I think that brings Myth down a lot. Once Reckon Etten and Splash Squatch are buffed, and sooner or later, I think Myth will get a lot better. But right now, they're just a pretty average school. They're pretty balanced, I would say. They struggle a lot against dot schools. They struggle a lot against healing, but they really don't struggle with much else. I think they're a very solid school. They dish out a lot more damage than you would think, and it's a fairly easy school to play, fairly straightforward. I can't really rank them any lower than bottom of A tier. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that these are, actually in order of which one's the best, with the left being the best. It's not necessarily, super strict, but generally speaking, I think Ice Life is better than Myth, for example. So yeah. Now Death, I'm gonna sound like I'm really patting myself on the back here, because I play mainly Death, also Myth. But I think Death is genuinely the hardest school to play at Grand, because it just requires so much more setup than any other school. Your best hit is Monster Mash, and for that you need to put on weaknesses. So if your opponent carries weakness counters or is a weakness countering school, God forbid, then you're gonna have a lot of trouble killing them. Okay, you don't have another hit that does more than Monster Mash. Skeletal Buccaneer does slightly more than Monster Mash with no weaknesses, but it's only a 5 pip, whereas some schools have 6 and 7 pip spells, which do a whole lot more. You have your 6 pip Wraith, but that only does 400 something because of the Drain nerf, which is fair, but I wish they were more pure damage TCs for Death. They have some really solid spells like Poison and Ghoul Path B, but it's just so hard to set up on Death. What other school do you really need to set up? Not really anything. I mean, I'm not talking about buff stacking. That's simple. I mean having weaknesses on your opponent, having a Ghoul Blade on, what you need shields to do, of course. You gotta make sure they don't remove any of those things before you finally get a hit where you somehow avoid them weaknessing you or shielding you because you can't counter either of those things. I think Death is the worst school in Grand, but it is not really bad still. It's still pretty good. Now Deathfire, I think, covers a lot of those weaknesses by countering the shields. It gives you so much more offense with things like Elf and Elephant. I think Deathfire is probably here, to be honest. It's significantly better, but it still has a lot of those issues that I listed. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on Balance Fire, which I think is probably, I want to say it's better than Balance, but because of what you get out of doing Balance into Fire, they do a lot of overtime strats. And frankly, I haven't really seen enough of Balance Fire to have a very solid opinion on it. But it seems slightly worse just because of the deck clutter. You can have such a simple deck with balance, and you kind of need it a little bit so you can pull your scarabs and your scorpions and all that, and your mantles, of course. You can't forget about the main deck mantles. Balance fire is a very, very cool strategy, I think, and it's very powerful, but I think balance probably, regular balance probably just has a slightly better win rate. But yes, that is all the schools and where I think they rank. Feel free to leave your disagreements or agreements in the comments, and I will try to, I'll discuss it. That sounds very passive aggressive. I swear it's not. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed. I hope y'all got something out of this. Maybe, hope you learned something maybe. And I will see y'all in the next one. Peace out. And here is the tier list without any of the dual schools, so it's a little bit easier to look at.